Just making sure that our connection is correct. Marlon, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Richie. Morning to you and morning to our listeners.
Thank you very, very much for joining us once again. Now, before I get into the poll results of that nationwide Bluedot polls, yesterday, Marlon, was a very interesting day in our parliament. Did you take note of what happened, and what are your impressions of what went down?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. So, just to apprise listeners, I did in fact tune in live on PBCJ whilst the meeting of the committee was going on. So, for the benefit of listeners, the Jamaican Parliament has in place what is called an oversight committee, or the Oversight Committee on the Integrity Commission. So, as many listeners may be aware, the Integrity Commission is Jamaica's premier anti-corruption watchdog entity. It has investigative powers and it also has prosecutorial powers. So if your listeners think of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, you know that there are prosecutorial powers there. And if you think of the police has considerable investigative powers as our premier law enforcement agency. Mm-hmm. The Integrity Commission has these two elements sitting under one umbrella. Now, like any other organization, the Integrity Commission cannot be a law unto itself, and it is not a law unto itself. It was established by the Integrity Commission Act of 2017, and importantly, there's an oversight mechanism where the Integrity Commission is concerned, because it is a commission of parliament, and the idea is that you would want a critical institution such as the Integrity Commission to be fit for purpose, working effectively in terms of pursuing its mandate, shining a light on corruption, but also the Integrity Commission is not above having light shone on it. If it is that there are actions that are contrary to law or whatever the Integrity Commission ought to be doing. So that's just a bit of an understanding for the listeners as to what we have on our hands here.
Yes.
Now, listeners will recall that the Integrity Commission investigated Prime Minister Andrew Holness in relation to his statutory declaration, and the matter of illicit enrichment was probed by the Integrity Commission, which culminated, Richie and listeners, in a report. Now, what we had yesterday was a meeting of the Integrity Commission Oversight Committee, which is chaired by a government member, Edmund Bartlett.
Yes.
The committee comprises members of both sides of the House. Two PNP members were in attendance yesterday, Julian Robinson and Philip Paulwell, and about 5 JLP members, including the chairman, because there was Justice Minister Delroy Chuck, there was Malahu Fort in attendance, Colonel Charles Jr. was in attendance, and Everett Warmington. Mm-hmm. The gist of what transpired yesterday is that at the commencement of the sitting of the committee to treat with or to take the report, an opposition member, Julian Robinson, raised a motion to essentially enable or essentially support a recommendation by the Integrity Commission for the matter, the investigation, to be referred to the Financial Investigation Division. And that motion was seconded by Philip Powell. For many reasons, some of which I will highlight in the course of this conversation, there were diverting and dissenting views to that motion raised by Julian Robinson, right? Mm-hmm. So just to be clear, the Integrity Commission in its report is essentially asking and inviting the Parliament to refer the matter that the Integrity Commission reported on, Holness's investigation, to the FID for further probe. Now, first of all, there is a strong view, and it is a view with which I associate myself, that is contrary to the scheme that is in place and what ought to happen. When the Integrity Commission undertakes an investigation, they have capabilities and they are allowed to collaborate with what is called competent authority. So, for example, they can collaborate with other entities in government, such as the Financial Investigations Division, and they may seek information from any entity in government that can essentially assist or further their investigation. During the course of this investigation, it is very curious and troubling that in circumstances where the Integrity Commission was able to avail itself of collaboration from FID, it did not do so, but in fact completed its report and completed its investigation and submitted its report to Parliament. So essentially, to be referring the matter to FID, we contend. Yes, the JLP members at the committee yesterday, the government members contend, and I also support that view, that this is essentially seeking to pass a matter for another investigative body to make a determination. So it's like a redetermination, it's like double jeopardy. It is essentially an inappropriate request because the Integrity Commission is now enlisting Parliament and seeking Parliament support in doing what it ought to have done.
So what will happen?
And that is why it's an untenable scenario.
What will happen, therefore? The Integrity Commission wants further investigation by the FID. The party, the governing party, is saying, the investigation was brought to a close. Why bother to go on to the FID? What happens next as far as you're concerned, Marlon?
All right. Excellent question. So I do not have the gift of clairvoyance as to precisely how this matter will play out, what will happen next, or how this matter will conclude one way or another. What I do know is that, for obvious reasons, the opposition PNP are chomping at the bits and are raising this issue because a lot of information came out in that report, which is largely prejudicial to the Prime Minister. It made no finding, no compelling finding was made against him, but he's being raked over the coals and he's being subjected to, prejudicial kind of realities in circumstances where the Integrity Commission was not able to make any adverse finding against him. Now, just to be very clear, what we have is a divergence of views here, because you are raising the question as to where we go from here, what will happen going forward. So the PNP, I suspect, will stand on the back of its motion, and it will be agitating for Parliament to refer the Integrity Commission's report, as the Integrity Commission has requested, to the Financial Investigation Division, FID, whilst the JLP will contend that, listen, what is to do that is not only contrary to appropriate practice, but is inappropriate and would not be justicious, as it were, for the subject of the investigation, the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister would be in a situation where he was subjected to a particular entity making a determination on a matter, and in circumstances where they completed their investigation and provided their report, the matter is now to be referred to another entity for a redetermination of the matter, and that is untenable. It's effectively what the Integrity Commission is seeking to do, and what the PNP is essentially supporting, is the Integrity Commission's abdication. Yes? Their abdication of their job and their delegation of their job to the Parliament. They're asking the Parliament to do what they ought to have done, which is an inappropriate delegation of their duty. And they're abdicating because they are the ones who ought to have enlisted FID in the course of their investigation so that they can be furnished with further and better particulars, and they were empowered so to do. They expended considerable resources on this investigation. They went as far, understandably so, as to contract the services of an independent international forensic accounting examiner, and they were still not able to make any finding that is adverse as far as illicit enrichment on the part of the Prime Minister is concerned.
All right,
so it is essentially subjecting the Prime Minister to double jeopardy, which is an untenable and an unfortunate state of affairs. We understand that the Prime Minister is a high-value target in the political arena, but it cannot be that the law applies to all of us, and then some persons, because it suits some, are to be treated differently because it is politically expedient.
All right.
We saw a high-profile case treated within Jamaica recently where the Court of Appeal felt that, having regard to all that has transpired in the matter, in terms of all the evidence that has gone out there, the time that they the accused persons had served, and so on, the Court of Appeal felt that a fair trial was not likely to have ensued, and as such, a particular person who many celebrate in the Jamaican popular culture and dancehall space is now a person who is free, and he has had his conviction quashed. It cannot be that laws apply for some people because it is convenient, and it doesn't, and it ought not to apply.
We heard
the same
you.
law that applies to Richie B, applies to Andrew Wallace, applies to Adidja Palmer, and applies to Marlon Morgan.
All right, you've expressed yourself on that one. Let's move on now to the primary matter, actually, that I called you about this morning, and that is to take a look at some aspects of the nationwide Bluedot polls. I indicated earlier some of the troubling areas. If you ask me, I'd say they're kind of troubling. I didn't point out the fact that younger respondents who were approached, 18 to 24 years old, and those affiliated with the PNP view corruption as a significant issue. So this is not something I'm sure that that you and your party would want to take lightly. How do you now address the widespread perception of corruption within the JLP at this time?
Excellent question, Richard. Because as you would appreciate, corruption is essentially a scourge on a society. And for any organization to be associated with allegations of corruption or to be perceived as having corrupt elements in their ranks, it is an undesirable situation. And so for us in the Jamaica Labour Party, we view these poll findings with concern. They are indeed concerning, but at the same time, they are not demoralizing. And I'm happy for this opportunity to present some perspectives to your listeners, because the truth is, unfortunately, corruption emerges or may manifest itself from time to time in the life of a government. It happens across the world. It happens on both sides. Should it happen? No. The unfortunate reality, though, is that it happens. And so what I would suggest to your listeners, particularly the 18 to 30-year-old listeners this morning, is that Jamaica, unfortunately, has had several instances of corruption over the many decades. What is important, however, is to appreciate and understand that this Andrew Holness-led government has essentially treated with the issue of corruption in ways that we have not seen any other government do, which is purposeful, decisive, and unequivocal actions have been taken in the face of corruption. So your young listeners, Richie B, may not remember certain developments of old. So they will not remember, for example, when Prime Minister Patterson gave a pardon to then Philip Powell, young Minister Philip Powell, by saying he was being youthfully exuberant. He just dismissed it as youthful exuberance. Prime Minister Holness has not done that. He has had ministers who have been relieved of their ministerial duty. So the first point I'd like to make is that where corruption has manifested itself since this government took office in 2016, there has been purposeful, decisive, and unequivocal action in relation to credible allegations of corruption. So you have had ministers who have been fired. Importantly as well, considerable investments and steps have been taken to strengthen Jamaica's system of governance. It is the JLP, Richie, and your listeners should appreciate this, that established at long last the Integrity Commission. We did so back in 2017, and for several years we have been increasing the budget of the Integrity Commission to ensure that it is properly resourced and it has appropriate capacity to undertake the work it has to undertake in shedding light on corruption and holding people accountable. But the Integrity Commission, like any other entity, must operate within the confines and parameters of that which is lawful and that which is appropriate. So separate and apart from the Integrity Commission, it was the JLP back in 2011 that established the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. And in this recent dispensation, for example, the first term between 2016 and 2020, a number of workshops which were designed to enhance the capacity of cabinet ministers and other members of the political executive were held. So I'm referring to corporate governance workshops, because ministers obviously select board members, for example, in some instances, and they essentially preside over the affairs of state. So it is good for them to have had corporate governance training because this strengthens their ability and their knowledge. It boosts their skill sets. And these are considerable investments that have been made because, for example, in February 2022, the Ministry of Finance developed and promulgated a code of conduct for board members. I spoke a while ago to numerous workshops that have been held, which build the capacity of members of the political executive. And coming out of the Petrojam-related matters, we have had an overhaul of how overseas travel is treated with and approved. It has to come to cabinet, basically.
But having said
have been done.
Yes, having said all of that, do you think, though, Marlon, that there is enough time before the next election for the party to regain the public trust, and how will you set about doing that?
Well, I am not an unrealistic person by nature. That's why I don't, go into delve into certain things. But what I'd say to you is that perceptions of corruption are as they are in the Jamaican context, because this is something with which we have grappled as a society over several decades. In other words, people feel the way they do because they believe that, politicians are a harm's house, them take for idiot, them thief, and so on. These are real and live perspectives in the minds of people, and they may well be correct. In fact, we have instances and scenarios which suggest that that the people are correct. In fact, you will recall a particular political party going to great lengths to frustrate the Traffic Bureau investigation and the Dutch authorities' probe of that particular matter. But coming to the specific question, I am of the view that to the extent that violations on the part of our political leaders and actors in the political space have caused people to lose trust and be disillusioned, that it will not be fixed overnight. Their perceptions will not correct overnight. And so we have a short period of time, yes, to the next constitutionally due general election. And having regard to the question you've asked, there is not a considerable period of time to turn the tide. However, there is no equivocation as it relates to efforts to support the fight against corruption, to shine light on corruption in terms of allowing for investigations and cooperating with investigations so long as the cooperation is lawful and is in keeping with what you're obliged to do. For example, the Integrity Commission was seeking to ascertain from the Prime Minister a schedule of personal expenses in circumstances where the Prime Minister, is not bound or mandated by law to do that, and in circumstances where it isn't practical for him to have done so either, because none of us walk around and literally itemize everything we spend on, and that would constitute our personal expenditure. So I know that this scourge of corruption, the perception of it will not be fixed overnight. It will take several years of probity and propriety in public life for the tide of public opinion to turn in that regard. But in the meantime, what has to be important is how government is operating and how government operates when corruption rears its ugly head, and importantly as well, the things that are in place to stamp out corruption. And I articulated several of them earlier, from the Integrity Commission, the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act, corporate governance training for members of the political executive, a code of conduct for board members and other key persons, and just a reform of how you select state boards. Because the Ministry of Finance right now has in place a database, which is a non-partisan database, but it comprises persons who have certain skill sets that would add value serving on the boards of certain public bodies.
Do you think you have a long enough list of achievements that you can highlight in the course of the next several months that would help to counter that perception of corruption in the government?
I absolutely believe the government has an unprecedented and an unparalleled list of achievements that it boasts. In fact, so impressive has the performance of this government been, particularly as it relates to tackling some of the more vexing, contentious, and long-standing issues that would have confronted Jamaican people. the Jamaican people, that our opponents are not able to articulate a credible vision for Jamaica and signal what they would do or what plans they have in store. They are not able to do so because the runs that have been put on the board, and importantly, just the many things that have been addressed. I speak of increased support for the most vulnerable among us. And the minimum wage has moved from just over $6,000 to currently $15,000 or so per week, right? We have had increases in pension payments to our pensioners. Our elderly in Jamaica have been some of the more neglected and overlooked persons. Whenever increase comes to the public sector and other groups, including minimum wages, get adjustments, our pensioners are oftentimes out of the conversation. This government has put pensioners at the forefront. As we speak, the health minister is doing a program called Operation Refresh, where the infrastructure at many of our clinics and health centers is being overhauled and improved, because we believe that our elderly in particular and other users of the service should access public health care in appropriate and dignified conditions. We had a public transportation issue last year, for example. The government has responded by purchasing over 100 JTC buses and putting those buses into the system to assist with commute in the KMTR and, of course, in Montego Bay. So when you think of what has been done for young people as well, the government has a lift program. The government has abolished the fees at heart. The government is providing support for nutrition to students attending hard in terms of lunch, support to buy lunch, and in terms of young people as well. That is why youth unemployment is at record lows in the country at present. So we are confident that in every respect, whether it is wages to the public sector worker, relative to what they would have gotten in previous iterations and from previous governments, including the PNP government that would have subjected them to wage freeze from Omar Davies' time and renewed again when Dr. Phillips was finance minister, the public sector workers are much better off having regard to what this government has done in terms of wage and entitlements than where they have ever been.
All right. We want to say thanks, though, for some of the infrastructural changes that have taken place, especially in terms of some additional highways that make it much easier for us to commute across.
For people in Western Jamaica, they will be getting a long overdue bypass, the Montego Bay bypass, because as you know, Top Road and Bottom Road is oftentimes a nightmare in Western Jamaica whenever you have drive time traffic, whether in the mornings or in the evenings.
All right, Marlon, we're out of time, but I want to thank you once again for coming on and speaking with us this morning on these issues. Have a good day, and we'll talk again soon.
You're most welcome, Richard. All the best.
All the best to you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was the big story, and you heard Marlon Morgan, of course, speaking as a member of the Communications Task Force for the JLP and addressing matters, as he pointed out, of concern based on the results of a survey, a poll that was done by nationwide Bluedot, and it shows the strong perception of many of the government being corrupt, and that and other issues were addressed by Marlon Morgan. What are your thoughts on what you heard? Are you in disagreement? Are you in agreement? Are you surprised? Unhappy? What are your thoughts? Let us hear from you. 876-861-4753 or 877-255-3086. We would love to hear from you.